8. Tashkent Agreement, 1966. The Tashkent Agreement was signed on January 10, 1966, between India and Pakistan, ending the 17-day Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, a conflict that saw over 6,800 soldiers killed, hundreds of tanks destroyed, and nearly 500,000 civilians displaced. Mediated by Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin in Tashkent, the deal required both sides to withdraw to pre-war positions and restore diplomatic ties, but notably sidestepped the core issue of Kashmir. Controversy erupted in both countries. In India, many accused Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri of giving up hard-won territory, despite Indian forces advancing close to Lahore. In Pakistan, President Ayub Khan was criticized for failing to secure Kashmir or any strategic gains, fueling rumors that secret clauses or superpower pressure had forced his hand. The agreement's lack of detail on Kashmir left both sides frustrated, and protests broke out in major cities. Adding to the intrigue, Shastri died suddenly in Tashkent just hours after signing the accord. Officially ruled a heart attack, his death sparked conspiracy theories, ranging from poisoning to Cold War espionage, especially since no post-mortem was conducted and the Indian government has kept related files classified. Curiously, the Tashkent summit marked a rare moment of Soviet diplomatic intervention in South Asia, reflecting Cold War rivalries as much as regional peace efforts. Ultimately, the agreement is seen as a short-lived truce, with unresolved tensions leading to another war just 5 years later. The legacy of Tashkent remains shrouded in suspicion, controversy, and unanswered questions. Major questions exploded after this agreement were these. Was he poisoned by the KGB for resisting Soviet terms? Eliminated by the CIA for getting too close to Moscow? Silenced by Indian political rivals fearing his rising influence? Or did he discover something during the talks, something worth killing for? Even today, the files remain sealed under national security. No answers, just shadows. Number 7. Camp David Accords, 1978. The Camp David Accords, signed in September 1978 after 13 days of secret negotiations, marked the first time an Arab nation recognized Israel. Brokered by U.S. President Jimmy Carter, the talks brought together Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin at the secluded Camp David retreat. The resulting agreements paved the way for the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, with Israel agreeing to withdraw from the entire Sinai Peninsula, over 60,000 square kilometers of territory, while Egypt became the first Arab state to establish formal diplomatic relations with Israel. The accords were celebrated in the West as a diplomatic triumph, earning Sadat and Begin the Nobel Peace Prize. However, the deal sparked outrage across the Arab world. Egypt was expelled from the Arab League, and 18 Arab countries severed ties. Many saw Sadat's move as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause, since the accords left the issue of Palestinian statehood unresolved. At home, Sadat faced massive protests and growing Islamist opposition, culminating in his assassination by extremists in 1981. Conspiracy theories swirled around the negotiations, with many alleging secret side deals involving U.S. military aid and oil guarantees. The U.S. did, in fact, provide Egypt and Israel with billions in annual aid as part of the peace process, a policy that continues today. Curiously, the Camp David summit was so secretive that even top U.S. officials were kept in the dark about the details until the final days. Despite its historic significance, the Camp David Accords remain controversial. The peace between Egypt and Israel has been described as cold, and the broader vision for Middle East peace outlined at Camp David never materialized. The accords stand as both a milestone for diplomacy and a reminder of the region's enduring divisions. But deeper rumors lingered. Did the Mossad have prior knowledge and stay silent? Did regional powers quietly fund plot to prevent other Arab states from signing peace? Was Sadat sacrificed as part of a larger geopolitical reshuffling? Number 6. Sino-British Joint Declaration, 1984. The Sino-British Joint Declaration, signed on December 19, 1984, set the stage for the 1997 handover of Hong Kong, then home to over 5.5 million people, from British to Chinese rule. The agreement promised that Hong Kong would enjoy a high degree of autonomy and keep its capitalist system and legal protections for 50 years under the one country, two systems formula. While the deal was hailed as a diplomatic breakthrough, it sparked anxiety in Hong Kong. In the decade before the handover, more than 500,000 residents emigrated, fearing the loss of freedoms. Property prices fluctuated wildly, and British passports for Hong Kongers became a hot political issue. Some conspiracy theories suggested secret side agreements on political appointments and business interests, though these were never substantiated. Controversy has only grown since 1997. Pro-democracy protests, most notably the 2014 Umbrella Movement and the massive 2019 demonstrations, highlighted deep distrust of Beijing's intentions. The 2020 national security law, imposed by China, led to the arrest of over 150 activists and politicians and was widely condemned as a breach of the joint declaration. The UK declared China an ongoing breach of the treaty, while Beijing insists the agreement is a historical document with no current legal force. Curiously, the joint declaration was registered with the United Nations, making it a rare example of a bilateral treaty with global visibility. Today, the fate of Hong Kong remains a major point of tension between China, the UK, and the international community, with whispers began almost immediately. The city's promised autonomy at the heart of the dispute. Was the treaty merely a cover for a pre-agreed transfer of control? Did secret clauses exist, promising Britain favorable trade in exchange for a quick exit? Were Western intelligence agencies aware that the 50 years promise was a fiction from day one? Number 5. Treaty of San Francisco, 1951. The Treaty of San Francisco, signed on September 8, 1951, by 48 nations, officially ended World War II in the Pacific and restored sovereignty to Japan. The treaty forced Japan to renounce claims to over 1.5 million square kilometers of territory, including Korea, Taiwan, Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands, and paved the way for the U.S. to maintain military bases in Japan, a presence that continues to this day with over 50,000 American troops still stationed there. Controversy surrounded the conference from the start. Key countries like China, both the PRC and ROC, and Korea were excluded, fueling decades of resentment and claims that their interests were ignored. The Soviet Union, India, and several others refused to sign, arguing the treaty was too lenient on Japan and failed to address reparations for millions of wartime victims. The unresolved status of the Kuril Islands remains a flashpoint between Japan and Russia, with both sides still disputing sovereignty. In Japan, the treaty split public opinion. Nationalists saw it as a humiliating imposed peace, while others viewed it as a pragmatic step toward economic recovery. Some conspiracy theories claim secret U.S.-Japan deals were struck to shield wartime leaders from prosecution in exchange for Cold War cooperation. Curiously, the treaty's signing ceremony at San Francisco's War Memorial Opera House was boycotted by several Asian nations, and to this day, not all countries affected by Japanese occupation have normalized relations with Tokyo. The Treaty of San Francisco remains a cornerstone of East Asian geopolitics, with its unresolved issues and exclusions still shaping diplomatic tensions more than 70 years later. Even today, some of the most controversial clauses remain opaque. The Soviet Union refused to sign, calling the treaty a sham. China declared it illegal. Japan's neighbors see it as a betrayal, a treaty that forgave without confession. Number 4. Oslo Accords, 1993 to 1995. In 1993, on the White House lawn, two bitter enemies shook hands, Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, as U.S. President Bill Clinton looked on with forced optimism. Cameras flashed, flags waved, and the world believed history had changed. But behind that handshake lay secret meetings, half-kept promises, and the seeds of future bloodshed. The Oslo Accords were supposed to deliver peace to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Instead, They gave birth to one of the most criticized diplomatic illusions of modern times. It began in secret, meetings in Norway, far from the media, far from the violence. Israeli officials and Palestinian representatives negotiated what they called a peace process. The result? Two major agreements, Oslo I, 1993, and Oslo II, 1995. The accords created the Palestinian Authority, promised phased Israeli withdrawal from parts of the West Bank and Gaza, and aimed for a final settlement within 5 years. But the deal was built on vagueness. Key issues, Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, and borders, were left for later. That later never came. From the start, conspiracy whispered around the edges. Did the Israeli leadership ever intend to allow a real Palestinian state? Was the Palestinian Authority designed to administer its people or control them on Israel's behalf? Did Western governments pressure Arafat into concessions he never wanted under threat of cutting aid and recognition? On the ground, peace never arrived. Israeli settlements in the West Bank increased after Oslo. Palestinian militants accused the PLO of betrayal and launched suicide attacks. The Israeli far-right erupted in rage. In 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist, not by Hamas, but by someone who believed Oslo was a national betrayal. And then came the Second Intifada. The final status talks collapsed. The promised Palestinian state vanished. Gaza fell under Hamas. The West Bank remained fragmented. And the very leaders who signed Oslo faded into history, some disgraced, others dead. Today, Oslo is remembered not as peace, but as managed failure. Critics call it a trap that turned Palestine into a series of fence zones, ruled by a government with no real sovereignty. Others say it allowed Israel to outsource the occupation while preserving its image abroad. Some claim the accords were never meant to succeed, only to delay, divide, and defuse. The Oslo Accord were signed with pens full of hope, but their pages now read like warnings. Peace that never had a chance. Number 3. Paris Peace Accords, 1973. January 1973. After years of bombing campaigns, body bags, and protests shaking the American home front, the U.S. and North Vietnam signed the Paris Peace Accords. The treaty was framed as an honorable end to the Vietnam War, but behind its carefully worded clauses lay a brutal truth. It was less a peace agreement and more a diplomatic exit strategy wrapped in fiction. The accords signed by the United States, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the Viet Cong's Provisional Revolutionary Government promised a ceasefire, withdrawal of U.S. troops, release of prisoners, and a political solution for South Vietnam. Henry Kissinger, America's chief negotiator, declared it peace with honor. But almost immediately, the lies unraveled. The U.S. claimed it had secured South Vietnam's sovereignty. But in truth, American forces withdrew while North Vietnamese troops remained inside the South, unchallenged. The ceasefire was a myth. Fighting resumed within hours. South Vietnam had no seat at the real table. Its president, Nguyen Van Thieu, called the deal a betrayal. Whispers inside Washington painted a darker picture. Did the U.S. knowingly abandon South Vietnam to collapse, just to save face before Nixon's re-election? Were secret side deals made with Hanoi, including promises of post-war aid that were never fulfilled? Did Kissinger accept terms he knew would fail, just to claim a diplomatic victory and win the Nobel Peace Prize? He did. So did North Vietnam's Le Duc, though, who refused it. And then came Operation Homecoming. American POWs were returned in emotional ceremonies. But the South Vietnamese? Forgotten. Thousands of anti-communist allies were left behind. Hundreds of CIA-linked operatives disappeared without a trace. Entire provinces fell to the north within months. By 1975, Saigon collapsed. Helicopters fled from rooftops. South Vietnam ceased to exist. The peace had lasted just 2 years, and only on paper. The Paris Peace Accords weren't a treaty between equals. They were a retreat in disguise. Some historians now call it a masterclass in stage diplomacy. Others argue it was a cold, calculated abandonment. And within Vietnam, the war didn't end, it just changed uniforms. The Paris Peace Accords ended America's role in Vietnam. But not the war, not the loss, not the shame. Peace scripted, staged, and swiftly undone. Number 2. Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, 1918. March 1918. As World War I dragged on and millions perished across Europe, a battered Russia, reeling from revolution, famine, and civil unrest, signed one of the most punishing treaties in modern history. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk officially took Russia out of the war. But to some, it looked less like diplomacy and more like a secret transaction, a betrayal sealed with ink and perhaps German gold. The treaty ripped Russia apart. Lenin's Bolshevik government gave away vast swaths of territory, including Ukraine, Finland, Belarus, Poland, the Baltic states, and parts of the Caucasus. That meant the loss of 50 million people, 1 million square kilometers of land, 1/3 of Russia's farmland, half its industrial base and coal production. It was a national amputation. Lenin called it a temporary evil, a survival move. But many believe something far more calculated was at play. Whispers of a German plot. Even before the treaty, Germany had allegedly financed Lenin's return to Russia via a sealed train across enemy territory. The goal? Destabilize Russia, knock it out of the war, and shift the balance. Did Germany intentionally fund the Bolshevik Revolution to collapse the Eastern Front? Was the treaty a prearranged payoff, Lenin's side of the deal, for Germany's silent sponsorship? British intelligence certainly thought so. Declassified documents suggest Western powers feared Germany had created a red puppet state to drain Allied resources and delay U.S. involvement. The Bolsheviks' internal gamble. Trotsky, leading negotiations, initially refused to sign, promoting the infamous no war, no peace stance. Some say this wasn't indecision, but stalling. Was Trotsky waiting for a socialist revolution to erupt in Germany, hoping the Central Powers would implode before the ink dried? Was Brest-Litovsk merely a distraction tactic, allowing Lenin to consolidate control inside Russia while pretending to make peace? Others point to Stalin's silence during the talks, unusual for someone with territorial ambitions. Some speculate Stalin saw the treaty as a strategic blunder or a future opportunity. Later, he would reclaim much of the lost territory by force, justifying invasions as restoring Russia's historical borders. The hidden clause theories. Rumors persist about undisclosed agreements, secret pledges of German military support against White Russian forces, quiet guarantees that Bolsheviks wouldn't interfere with German influence in Eastern Europe, economic deals involving German access to Soviet grain and oil bartered under the table. None were confirmed, but none were convincingly denied either. And when Germany lost the war in late 1918, the treaty became null, conveniently. The Soviets moved quickly, retaking much of the lost territory. Did Lenin ever intend to honor the treaty long-term? Was it a tactical lie to buy time, disarm enemies, and strike back later? The final cost. The treaty sparked fury across the political spectrum. Monarchists, nationalists, even many Bolsheviks saw it as treason. It helped ignite the Russian Civil War. It alienated Russia from the Allies. And it set the tone for a century of realpolitik masked as revolution. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk wasn't just a peace agreement. It was a shell game of power, betrayal, and survival, with nations as the currency. A treaty signed in desperation, fueled by money, ideology, and maybe manipulation. Peace with strings pulled from the shadows. Number 1. Treaty of Versailles, 1919. The Treaty of Versailles is widely regarded as the most controversial peace treaty of the 20th century. Signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, it officially ended World War I between Germany and the Allied powers. The negotiations took place over 6 months at the opulent Palace of Versailles, involving more than 30 nations, but Germany was excluded from the talks until the very end. The treaty imposed severe terms on Germany. Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause, forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for the war. The country was ordered to pay reparations totaling 132 billion gold marks, an amount so large that it was still being paid off well into the 21st century. Germany lost about 13% of its European territory, including Alsace-Lorraine to France, Ypres and Malmedy to Belgium, and all overseas colonies. The Saar Basin, rich in coal, was placed under League of Nations control, and the industrial Rhineland was demilitarized. The German military was reduced to just 100,000 men, with no conscription, no tanks, no heavy artillery, no aircraft, and no submarines. The Navy was limited to a handful of ships. These restrictions left Germany feeling vulnerable and humiliated. The treaty's harsh terms triggered outrage across Germany. It was denounced as a diktat, a dictated peace, since German representatives were given no choice but to sign. The economic burden contributed to hyperinflation in the early 1920s, with the German mark becoming virtually worthless. Unemployment soared, and social unrest grew. Many Germans believed the War Guilt Clause was unjust, fueling the stab in the back myth that claimed Germany's defeat was the result of betrayal by politicians and Jews, rather than military failure. This narrative was later exploited by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to gain support. Internationally, the treaty was also divisive. In the United States, the Senate refused to ratify it, and the U.S. never joined the League of Nations, undermining the organization's authority from the start. France and Britain, meanwhile, disagreed over how strictly to enforce the treaty's terms, leading to further diplomatic tensions. Conspiracy theories have long surrounded the treaty. Some historians argue that secret deals, such as the Sykes-Picot Agreement and promises made to Italy and Japan, shaped the final borders and sowed seeds of future conflict. Personal rivalries among the Big Four leaders, Woodrow Wilson, David Lloyd George, Georges Clemenceau, and Vittorio Orlando, also influenced the outcome, with Wilson's idealistic 14 points largely sidelined in favor of harsher measures. The signing ceremony itself was highly symbolic. It took place in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the same location where the German Empire had been proclaimed in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. This choice was a deliberate humiliation for Germany and deepened the sense of injustice. Curiously, the treaty's impact extended far beyond Europe. The redrawing of borders in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia created new states and mandates, many of which became flashpoints for later conflicts. The League of Nations, intended to prevent future wars, proved ineffective, failing to stop the rise of fascism and the outbreak of World War II just 2 decades later. Today, the Treaty of Versailles is seen as both a bold attempt at peacemaking and a cautionary tale about the dangers of punitive diplomacy. Its legacy is still debated by historians, with some arguing it was too harsh and others claiming it was not enforced strictly enough. What is clear is that the treaty's unresolved grievances and unintended costs